And so this node right here isn't looking at this image. It's actually looking at an image that looks like this, which can be convenient if you're doing things like selecting stuff by color or brightness. Then you don't have the other nodes kind of messing with that. And so let's just right click and say node label here. And we'll just say darken window. For this one, let's brighten his eyes. So maybe we'll make another kind of soft circle here. I'll just put maybe on this eye just to brighten it up a little bit. Maybe we'll just take this curve and just push that up just a touch just to brighten it. I don't know if I like that. Maybe I'll take the offset up a little. Yeah, I like that a little better. Take the offset up. Then I can also add another window just by going here and clicking this plus circle like this. That'll add another circle window. And those are both going to be applied by default, just added together for our node. And you can see in the little preview here that it's only affecting the eyes. You can also go here to this tab, which is the key tab, and we can look at the selection that we're making. So we're brightening his eyes, and then over here, maybe we'll adjust his lips. So let's do that curves trick here, hue versus hue. I'll just select his lips like that. And maybe we don't want those quite as pink. I'll just push that down a little bit, widen out these here a little. It's gonna just tone those red lips down a little bit. And we're also gonna limit this with a window. That's the cool thing, is you can do multiple things in one node. I can put curves and stuff with our primaries and sharpening and all kinds of stuff into this. And then I can limit it with this window. So I'll take a circle window and just limit it to the lips right there. So now I'll just disable these by hitting Control D. Now we have our original footage. We have our primary correction. Then we are darkening this side of the screen, brightening up his eyes a little bit, and changing the color of his lips. And because these are all in parallel nodes, these nodes are going to interact with each other in a way that's expected. If that's too much for you, it's really okay. Just do your big wide corrections in serial nodes and your little localized corrections in parallel nodes, you'll be fine. Now, we have our masks set up here, and we have some specific masks like right on his eyes, which is cool, and it looks good for this frame, but as soon as we play this back, there's some problems. Now, it's not so obvious on this shot, but if we look with the overlay, we'll notice that we're not really selecting his eyes. His head is moving around. And so this brightness on his eyes should really follow his eyes, right? So how do we do that? Well, we can use a tracker right here in the color page that is absolutely mind-blowingly fantastic. Check this out. I'm gonna start at the beginning of my clip, just because that's where we set this up. And I'm just gonna put my windows where I want them to be. And I'm gonna select this window and go over to this next tab here. This is our tracker tab. And I'll just hit this track back and forth button and look what happens. Watch this. It just locks onto his eye and tracks it in 1 second, okay? Same thing for this one, tracks it. Crazy. So now, look at that. They perfectly follow his eyes. Isn't that nuts? It's like no effort to track stuff in the color page. And again, it's very forgiving because really, a lot of the time you're using pretty soft masks. And so it's amazing how quickly you can refine an image, even an image that's moving and zooming and doing all kinds of stuff and people turning their heads and all of that. You can get really fine on these details. Do the same thing on the lips. We'll just make sure we select this window and then track this back and forth. No problem. And it completely follows his face. Isn't that nuts? That's just wild. There are so many other things you can do in the color page. I'm trying to keep it to just the essentials, but man, it's hard. Let's hit Alt P and make another node. And in this one, I want to soften kind of the details in his face. Now, there are a lot of ways to do this, but one way that works pretty darn well is to take this mid detail slider here and just push this to the left. And look what that does. That kind of gives us that kind of Instagram kind of gloss filter. Look at that. That really starts to soften his skin. All right. Now it makes everything else look really bad. And so again, this is one of those times where we're going to want to combine this with a selection of some kind. So one thing that we could do would be to just again, grab a soft circle window. We can just put this in here like this. And that's probably going to give us a pretty good result, honestly. So here's before, here's after. But there are a few problems here. We're blurring a little bit of the background here. It's going into his eyes a little bit, blurring his hair. And so it would be nice if we could just select his skin. And there are automated, a little bit fancier ways to do this in the paid version of Resolve, but I want to show you just an old school trick. All right. We're going to keep this window on here. We're going to just limit it to something like this. But then we're going to make another selection just by selecting his skin here. Now, how do we do that? We can go to this fourth tab right here and select this little eyedropper. What this will do is this will make a selection kind of like we select with our windows, but it's doing it kind of like the way that you will select a color for a green screen. And so I'll actually turn off our window here and probably turn off our midtone detail too, just so we can see just what this is doing. And I can take my eyedropper and just drag over his skin like this. And that's going to set these sliders to certain values. What this is basically doing is keying our image and setting the mask for this node to be whatever colors are included. It's selecting by the color. And I can see this a little bit better if I go up here to this icon, which is our highlight icon, which will turn on our highlight mode. And that will pretty much put this on this gray and just show you the colors that it's selecting. So we can go back to our qualifier here. By the way, this is called a qualifier. And we can adjust these sliders back and forth and the softness of the selection to only select his skin color. All right. Maybe turn off the saturation, probably turn off the luminance because it doesn't help too much. And we can get a good selection here using this key because what we really want is just the skin. Once we have a pretty good selection here, we can go to these matte finesse controls, and this will let us adjust our selection a little bit. One thing that's going to help is if we push up this pre-filter just a touch, that's going to get rid of some of those blocky things. We can also clean the black and clean the white. That's going to fill in some of those holes. We also might just want to play with this center until we get mostly just his skin. We don't really want his eyes or anything, so maybe we do want to adjust the luminance here. Just push this around. There we go. We're mostly just wanting his skin, something like that. And this process is very tricky to make this work. And so you really only want to do these kind of things with subtle adjustments. And so maybe we'll do something like that and then limit it with the window even more. So I can take this and just select his skin like this. And now we have mostly just his skin being selected. Then I can switch out of highlight mode and I'll take this midtone detail down, and that's going to soften his skin in a way that's a little more subtle. So we aren't messing with the rest of the image so much. We're just dealing with some of the details on his skin. That gives him just a little bit more softness. You can really overdo this too. So we're just going to push this up just a little bit just to take the edge off. And so that's how you can do a little bit of beauty refinement and everything. Again, what this qualifier is doing is it's making a selection. And in that selection, we can do anything that we would do to this node, just like we can with a window. But you can get yourself in trouble here because if you do some kind of really extreme correction, so if I take this gamma and push it blue, you can really easily see this selection. All right. And usually it doesn't even look as good as this. You can really get yourself in trouble with this kind of thing. And so if you're going to do something like change a color, I'd highly recommend that you do that with something like this hue versus hue curve, because it's just a lot harder to get yourself in trouble. But these are all things that we can do to just refine each image even more. Let's do another shot. Again, I'll hit Alt S for a new serial and then a couple of parallels, Alt P like that. And we can use these kind of circle windows to really darken down parts of our frame. A lot of the time I'll just grab the offset and push that down. And you can really make a big difference in your shot just with these little windows. And you can add multiple windows to each node. And remember, you can always add more windows to each node, and they don't have to be the same kind either. This window is one that I use a lot. This is a gradient. And what it does, if I were to make this pink, this does the correction and then fades it out over this line. And so I could do something like push this here on the side, and then let's not make this pink. Let's just have that darken stuff a little bit. And we can just darken one side of our frame pretty easily. Okay. Really gives that a lot more impact. Maybe we want to darken this part because there's just too much light here. Same thing, probably just a soft circle would do fine. Put it here, take that offset down a touch, just so it's not so distracting. So here's before and here's after. And you can go absolutely crazy on this and do this for every single shot if you want to. I'd recommend that you wait to get this detailed on stuff until you have time. The very first thing that you should do when color grading your shots is get a creative look and then match them all together. Once you have that, then if you have time, you can go through and make things look prettier and prettier. But don't start with that even though it's fun. You can't always start with the most fun thing, unfortunately. Last thing I want to touch on in the color page there are a couple other color wheel palettes that you'll see used on a regular basis if you watch color grading tutorials. One is the log wheels. The other one is the HDR wheels. Now, what the heck? Why are there so many wheels? Here's the short answer. These primaries, if I were to, let's go to a different shot here so we can see what's going on. These primaries, if I were to grab this gain, let's look at our waveform here, if I were to take the gain and push that up, what that's going to do is adjust the entire image, but it's going to adjust the brighter parts stronger, all right? It's like in the curves, when you take the top part and you move it like this. In fact, that's pretty much what gain is, all right? The gamma adjusts the middle, but it leaves the white point and black point where they are. So it's basically doing this. The lift adjusts the black point, which is doing this. So it affects the entire image, but it's a lot stronger in the darker parts, okay? Now, if we go to our log wheel, we have a similar layout here, but look what happens when I adjust the highlights. As I push this up, actually not a lot's happening. And that's because adjusting these highlights is like putting a dot here and then adjusting the white point from there. It sort of limits the adjustment to the upper part of the image. And really, you don't see a whole lot going on because we don't have that brightest stuff. Same thing for the shadows. As I move those around, it only affects the lower part of the image like this. There's an anchor right here. So to see that difference, lift does this, shadow in the log wheels does this. So it's limited to just the dark parts. And you can adjust where that little cutoff point is with these sliders right here, the range sliders. And so as I push up the shadows, see, I'm pushing those up and it's really only affecting this part of the image. But as I adjust the range, then I can have it adjust more or less of the image. And so I could do something like push my highlight really yellow, and it doesn't really affect anything until I bring this highlight range down and start to tell it that more things are highlights. So there we go. Now we're considering this part and these parts of the image as highlights, and now things are getting yellow, right? It's basically just splitting up the image into kind of thresholds. Highlights adjusts this, shadows adjust this, midtones adjust this. Instead of adjusting the entire image, it splits it up, okay? So what the heck do you do with these kind of things? This is if you're trying to adjust something really specific. Like for instance, if I want just this window to be darker, but I don't want to adjust anything else, I could take my highlights down a little bit and then adjust this range to where it starts affecting the window. And so now I'm mostly just adjusting the highlights without even touching the shadows and the midtones so much. And so again, this is for secondary corrections for the most part. Something that's confusing about calling these log wheels is a lot of people think that if you have log footage, you should use the log wheels, or that log wheels only work in log space, or that by using it, it turns it into log or anything. None of that's a thing. Where this starts and stops is this is called log wheels. That's it. Just ignore everything else. This is what they call the adjustments that split up the image into these tonal areas, okay? The HDR palette is basically a big boy version of that. Instead of splitting it up into 3 parts, it splits it up into 6 parts. That's it. And so we have the range control for each one and the softness for the threshold of each one, and it's split up into 6 parts. If you click on the little sunshine for any of these, you can see what it's affecting. So specular, basically nothing. Highlights, things that are a little bit darker. Light is that range. Shadow is this range. Dark is this range. And black is this range. And so it splits it up into these tonal ranges, and you can adjust each one to your liking. Basically, if you want to get really detailed with things. My advice, if you're brand new to color, don't even worry about the HDR wheels. Don't even touch them. Sometimes maybe you'll get into the log wheels, but honestly, just stay with primaries because that is going to be able to do 99% of what you ever need to do, and it's much, much simpler. Now, something about color. This is one of the most fun things about color. They have these color surfaces that are really cool. It's basically a way for you to be able to touch all of the controls with hardware knobs and sliders and everything, and it makes it go a lot faster, and it's more fun, more tactile. There's all kinds of good reasons to use a color panel. They have multiple different versions. The most affordable one being this DaVinci Resolve Micro Color Panel, which actually works with an iPad, which is really neat. There are 3 trackballs here, and those correspond to lift, gamma, and gain. And there's these rings that rotate around the trackballs, which correspond to the master wheels. And then a lot of these knobs and buttons and everything are basically these things. All right. So there isn't really anything that you can only do on a color surface. It just makes things a little bit easier and a little bit faster. They have a bigger version of the color surface called the mini panel, and an absolute crazy spaceship version, which is called the advanced panel, which has a million different buttons and things. And like I said, this is really fun, and it gives you the tactile control that there's just really nothing like it. And these color panels are a little bit expensive. The micro color panel starts at $559. The mini panel is about $2,300 and the advanced panel is $30,000. But the question is, do you actually need one to do color? No, you don't need one to do color. In fact, I would recommend that unless you plan on doing a lot of color, and when I mean a lot of color grading more than 1,000 shots a week, I think that's when it really gets useful to have a color surface. If you're doing that kind of volume of color work, it's absolutely worth the investment and it makes it more fun. If you're making a video every couple weeks and it has 80 shots, honestly, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal that you get a color surface or not. So do you actually need it? Not really. If you're really into gear and you want your desk to look really cool and you really want to practice getting quick at color, maybe you're wanting to be a colorist and maybe eventually do 1,000 shots a day. If you're really hardcore on that, then yeah, you should totally get one. Or if you have the money and can responsibly spend it and you need to justify something like this to your boss or spouse, you can show them this part of the video. They absolutely need a color surface. It's imperative. If you don't have a color surface, what are you doing? Do you even video? Go ahead and make that investment. Are they gone? Okay. So there's about 11 billion other things that I want to show you on the color page. If you want to learn more about color, let me know in the comments. We'll talk more about it, but we got to move on. We got to keep going. The poor souls who edit this video are going to have my hide if I don't keep moving. So let's go. All right, let's talk about the Fairlight page. So this is the audio world of DaVinci Resolve. You can think of this as like the main dedicated audio app. In the Adobe world, this would be like Adobe Audition or something. Or for those of us who've been around for a little bit, something like Pro Tools. This is the dedicated audio part of Resolve. Now you can do a lot of audio stuff in the edit page of Resolve, but you can think of this as there's two separate apps here. There's your editing app, which has general effects and it has some audio tools. And you can add clips and you can move them around and you can fade things and you can adjust volume and that kind of thing. So it's like the basic version of adjusting audio. Whereas an audio app, the idea is that you can get super detailed with your audio. You can have lots and lots of tracks. There are specialized audio effects, plugins, all kinds of things. And it's just really tuned into making good audio. And that's exactly what's happening here in Fairlight page. Just like the other pages of Resolve, your timeline here in the edit page can just be opened in Fairlight just by clicking on the Fairlight page. So here we are. Here's our color timeline that we've been working on. And this part down here is a similar interface where we have our timeline and we can adjust the height of our audio tracks. But look how big we can make these audio tracks. And look how much we can zoom in here. So I'll just put this in here and just hit Control plus a bunch. We can really zoom in here crazy, even down to the sample level of audio. So Fairlight can get just as crazy as you want to get when it comes to getting detailed with your audio. One of the first things you might be thinking is, okay, I can do a lot of this in the edit page, right? I can zoom in and I can get crazy with audio here in the edit page. When should I move to the Fairlight page? What's the point of doing Fairlight stuff over the edit page? And the honest truth is that you can move back and forth. It's not really that essential that you're like ready to do audio before you go into the Fairlight page. A lot of the time what I do is I'll jump into Fairlight and I'll adjust some things that Fairlight's good at and then switch back to the edit and kind of keep editing. And then if I want to mess with the clip, maybe I'll go over to Fairlight and adjust the clip and everything. What's really cool is that this whole timeline on the Fairlight page is the same as the edit page. And so if I add a fade on the Fairlight page and switch over to the edit page, we have that same fade right here on the edit page. If I were to right click and change the clip color here on the Fairlight page, guess what? That clip color is on the edit page. And so it's nice because you can really just go back and forth. And this is huge because in basically every other app ever, you can't do that. You would have to do something like export your timeline as an XML or some kind of format that an audio app can open, which means that you should have things pretty well dialed in and pretty much finalized before you go into the audio app. And you don't even have to worry about that with Fairlight. We're so spoiled. You can just switch over to Fairlight and do some adjustments, switch back to edit, no problem, okay? So we can switch into Fairlight and back if we want to get a little bit more fancy with our audio. But let's take a second and look at the interface here. So right here we have our timeline, and this acts pretty much like it does in the edit page. There are tracks, there are clips, you move around in time, all of that. Now it's possible that on your system, you don't have the video tracks. If you go up here to this little icon, there are all kinds of options for viewing our timeline. And there's actually a similar button to this in the edit page right here and the cut page, right? So anytime you want to adjust how your timeline looks, there's some kind of version of this. But here, this top menu item is display video tracks. And so if you're just working on audio, sometimes you don't really need the video tracks, but I don't know, for me, it's comfortable to be able to see the video tracks just so that this looks a little bit more familiar to the edit page. Because sometimes I'll have clips colored a certain way or arranged a certain way that kind of helps me navigate where things are on the timeline. And I don't want to lose that in Fairlight. Over here on our track headers, we have our mute and our solo. So we can mute tracks and solo tracks. Solo basically just mutes everything except for that track. We have meters for the tracks. And I'll tell you something, in Fairlight, tracks are your best friend, okay? You need to be good friends with tracks. Don't be afraid to add lots and lots of tracks. Get familiar with how tracks work because tracks are the magic when it comes to audio. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. Over here to the right, we have our mixer, and this is where we adjust controls for our mix as well as each track. This is where we can set inputs for recording. We can add effects. We can adjust dynamics, which we'll get into in a little bit. We can adjust EQ. We can route each track to a separate bus, which is like a group of tracks, like a submix. We have pan controls and our volume here for each track. Up here in the middle, we have our tools, which are very similar to the edit page. Playback controls, again, very similar. And we have a big bunch of audio meters here. This is going to show you the volume of every single track in your mix. We have a loudness meter here, which helps monitor how loud things are perceived, which can be good if you're doing broadcast things, and even somewhat useful if you're making mixes for YouTube. And then we have our viewer here. It's a lot smaller, but we can actually pop this out and make a little bit bigger viewer if we want to. I'll just pop that back in. But really, we have a lot of space here in the timeline because this is where we're going to do most of our work. We're going to be adding sound effects and mixing things and moving them around. A lot of that happens in the timeline and the mixer. Up along the top, we have some familiar windows, our media pool and our effects. Those work just like the other ones. We have our metadata and our inspector. Again, same thing as the other pages, and some other panels that we might get into here in a little bit. So let's work on something, shall we? Let's switch back to the edit page here for a second. And in the Fairlight folder, if you imported it with me at the beginning of this video, you should have several different files here. I'm just going to right click here in the empty space and hit timelines, create new timeline. And we'll call this Fairlight timeline, hit create. And let's build our quick time that we can work through together. You should have a movie here called Fairlight Page Video Track B. Drag this in like this. And then there's also Fairlight DIA, that's short for dialogue. We'll drag this down here. And this is going to be the audio for our scene. And we're going to make sure this came through just right here in a second. But this is a different scene from the same movie that lends itself to some sound design, some mixing, some fun. So let's switch over to the Fairlight page and take a look at what we've got. In the Fairlight page, by default, it shows you a little bit more about the audio channels. This dialogue is coming in as a mono track. The reason I know that is because this track is a stereo track. I can tell by this little 2.0 right here. What that's going to do is have a list of channels within this track. So this dialogue is actually just one track that comes in on the left channel. Hold up, I gotta get my headphones. There we go. So if we play this back, we're just gonna hear that on the left speaker. And there are actually more tracks in this WAV file. So let's open this up in the media pool, right click and go to clip attributes. We're gonna go to audio, and we're gonna make sure that our format is set right. We should set it like this: format mono, audio 1 mix, mono, audio 2 mix. You can pick which track you want on each of these. That looks good. And I'll hit OK. Then let's take this dialogue and let's drag this down and look at this. This is actually adding it in 2 different tracks. So why don't we right click on this track here and say change track type to mono. And then we have our audio 2. This is mono as well. So let's get rid of this and just move this down. So that's what we should have, is 2 separate tracks like this. Sometimes things just don't come in right for whatever reason on the edit page. Sometimes when you have fancy audio tracks, you might need to jump into Fairlight to get that working. But this is what we should have, is our dialogue wave should have 1 channel on this track and 1 channel on this track, and both of these tracks should be mono. Okay. So now if we play this back, because these are mono, they're both going to come out of both speakers, but they are going to be separate tracks here.
Where is he?
I had him and then you pushed me.
Great. So this is just the dialogue for our sequence. And probably 75% of what we're going to be doing here in Fairlight is stuff that you've really already learned in the edit page. So this section of this video is going to be a little bit shorter. but I do want to show you some specific stuff in Fairlight that's really neat. One thing that we can do is split each of these up into little clips, which again happens like you would on the edit page. But you'll notice when I click on this, it actually selects both of these tracks. So I'm going to select this, right click, and go down to where it says link clips and uncheck that. Now I can move each of these separately, which is probably going to be really good for what we're doing. And I can use the same shortcuts that I was using. I can split each track. I can just select it like this. I can grab and trim it. Very similar, just like we would on the edit page, just splitting and trimming like this. And it's silent here, so we don't really have to trim this, but I like to do that just to keep organized a little bit easier to think of these in little chunks. And it also feels like it's empty here, which it is. There's no sound at all here. And so that kind of reminds us that, hey, we need to actually add some sound to this in order for this to feel like a finished professional kind of product. Now, something that's really unique to the Fairlight page is its way of selecting pieces of clips. So let's zoom in here a little bit. I'll go ahead and close my media pool just so we have a little bit of space. Make this a little bigger. And let's say that I want to select and adjust this waveform right here. In the edit page, what I would have to do would be to go here and split this, and then I have this as a separate thing. But what I can actually do in the Fairlight page is I can select regions. So I can grab this second tool here, which is range mode, and I can click and drag, and that's going to set an in and an out, and that's going to let me go in and be a little bit more detailed with the actual sounds itself. So I can make this selection and hit backspace, and that'll just get rid of that part of the audio. I can also grab this line and push it up, and that's going to add little keyframes to this volume line. And so I can push that up like that. And then if I want to select a different part, I can do it like this. And so that makes it really easy to be able to select a piece and kind of adjust it without having to do a bunch of manual keyframing and stuff. Now, the thing that's not great about this is that if I want to, say, move this clip around, I can't. I'm just selecting parts of it. I would have to switch to this other mode. But what I can do is switch to this focus mode, and that's a combination of these tools. So if I'm on the top part of the clip, I can do my range mode just like before. But if I'm on the bottom part of the clip, I can grab the clip and move it back and forth. And so this is a really nice way to work inside of Fairlight, especially if you're going in and adjusting pieces of your clips. Just remember to be on the top part of the clip if you want to adjust a range, and the bottom part if you want to move things around. So yeah, just like the edit page, I can hit Alt and add little keyframes here to the volume. But what's cool is I can animate a whole bunch of stuff in the same way. And to select what I want to animate, I can go over here to this little drop down where it says none, and there are all kinds of things that I can keyframe here. So by default, it's the clip volume right here, but I can also adjust the fader level. It kind of does the same thing, but for the track. And so what this is going to do is automate this slider, and watch what happens when I play this back. It turns it down. And so you can keyframe anything in the mixer for the track, just like that. And this is the kind of thing that you just can't do on the edit page. And now if I want to remove that automation, I can hold Control and Alt and just click on these little points and get rid of it. Yay!